In the course of human relationships, there comes a point when the bond that once flourished begins to fade into silence. This shift is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but the wise will notice it in the small details. The longer pauses, the quieter conversations, the absence of warmth in the touch. It is a form of emotional retreat, a quiet departure that begins long before the final goodbye. The Stoic understands that emotions are a force not to be fought, but observed. They arise, they shift, and eventually they fade. And in these fading emotions, we are called not to lament, but to learn. We must see the withdrawal not as betrayal, but as a natural response to internal dissonance. For in understanding this process, we gain mastery over ourselves, our emotions, and ultimately, our peace. The journey of emotional disconnection is not one of revenge or fault. It is a reflection of the deeper complexities within the heart, where often no words can suffice to explain. Let us delve into the truth of this quiet transformation, for in doing so, we embrace the wisdom of emotional clarity. The quiet shift, how emotional detachment begins. In every relationship, there exists a beginning, an origin where two souls find each other and connect. It starts with words, glances, shared moments, and promises of forever. But like all things in nature, what begins in warmth may one day face the chill of cold. The shift in emotional energy is not immediate, nor is it loud. It is quiet, like the gradual closing of a door that for a time you didn't realize was even open. When women begin to emotionally disconnect, the signs are not always visible. It is not an abrupt change, nor is it marked by arguments or fights. Often, it starts with a softening of attention, the subtle withdrawal of affection. The words that once came easily become fewer, the gestures that once held meaning become routine or disappear altogether. The connection that once felt constant now feels like a distant memory, a warmth that has faded into the background of life. This withdrawal, however, is not born of malice or disregard. It is born of an inner realization, a quiet understanding that something is no longer in balance. Stoics understand the natural ebb and flow of emotions. They recognize that feelings are like the tides of the sea. They rise and fall, shift and change. The key to wisdom is not to resist the ebb, but to observe it with clarity. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, it is often because her inner world no longer aligns with the outer reality of the relationship. She may no longer feel heard, understood, or valued. Perhaps her needs, unspoken for so long, have been ignored, and so, as her emotions shift, she begins to retreat. It is not a decision made lightly, but one that is often necessary for her emotional well-being. The quiet shift is not the result of one single event, but of many small moments where emotional neglect or disconnection has built up over time. A partner may fail to notice the changing energy, believing that everything is fine, when in reality a woman may be silently withdrawing, feeling the need to protect herself from the pain of unfulfilled expectations. It is in this quiet retreat that the emotional detachment begins, not with a harsh confrontation, but with a slow, almost imperceptible pull away from what once felt secure. This shift is not a sign of weakness, nor is it a failure of love. It is a sign of strength, a sign that a woman is beginning to understand the importance of her own emotional preservation. The Stoic way teaches us that we cannot control the actions or emotions of others, but we can control how we respond to them. And when someone begins to withdraw, the wise person does not react with anger or frustration. Instead, they recognize the shift for what it is, a natural progression of events. To force someone to remain emotionally present when they are no longer invested is a path to further destruction. The wise understand this. They do not chase after what is no longer present. They respect the silence, for in it lies the wisdom of understanding the impermanence of all things. The quiet shift is a moment of emotional recalibration. It is a turning inward, a retreat to one's own sense of self. For a woman who begins to emotionally disconnect, it is an act of survival, a way to protect herself from the heartache of an unbalanced relationship. The wise will recognize this moment not as a betrayal, but as a natural part of the human condition. All things are temporary. Love is no exception. And when the love that once felt so real begins to fade, the Stoic does not cling to it in desperation. Instead, they allow it to run its course, knowing that in the end all relationships evolve, and some inevitably must end. The inner conflict, why they struggle to speak their truth. In the realm of human emotions, there exists a paradox, the struggle between the desire to connect and the need to protect oneself. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, it is not because she no longer cares, but because a deep internal conflict takes root within her. She finds herself torn between the silence of her heart and the longing for expression, the need for emotional safety and the desire for open communication. This conflict does not arise out of malice or anger, but from the tension between vulnerability and self-preservation. Stoicism teaches us that the path to inner peace is through acceptance of the natural forces that govern our emotions. We are neither masters nor slaves to our feelings. Instead, we observe them and let them guide us toward wisdom. In the case of emotional disconnection, a woman may feel conflicted because she knows that speaking her truth could either heal the relationship or sever it altogether, and yet she remains silent, unsure of how to express what has grown within her heart. This silence, though, is not an absence of emotion. It is the result of a delicate internal balance, the need for honesty, clashing with the fear of the consequences that honesty might bring. There is an inherent fear in speaking one's truth, particularly when it comes to matters of the heart. The words may not come easily because they carry weight. They are fraught with the potential to wound, and so, in her internal turmoil, a woman may struggle to find the right time, the right words, or the right way to communicate what has been building in her for so long. She may fear rejection, misunderstanding, or worse, the dissolution of the relationship itself. This internal battle is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. For it takes immense courage to confront one's own emotions and to make the decision to speak or remain silent. The Stoic understands the importance of emotional clarity. The wise recognize that our emotions are not the enemy, it is our fear of them, our avoidance of their truth, that causes us pain. When a woman holds back her truth, it is often because she does not yet have the clarity to express it. She may fear the consequences of her words, unsure of how they will be received or whether they will make any difference at all. She may wonder if it is even worth the effort to speak, knowing that her words could either bridge the gap or widen it further. This internal struggle is the result of a deep emotional investment, a recognition that what she says matters, that the relationship is not something to be taken lightly. In this moment of internal conflict, the wise Stoic understands that the silence is not a betrayal, but a reflection of the complexity of human nature. There are times when words are insufficient, when no matter how hard one tries to articulate their feelings, the truth still seems to evade expression. The Stoic does not rush to fill the silence with empty words. Instead, they allow the silence to be what it is, a space for reflection, a moment of understanding. And in that silence, both parties have the opportunity to contemplate the true nature of the relationship, to examine whether it can be restored or whether it is simply time for both to move forward. The struggle to speak one's truth is not unique to women alone. It is a universal challenge we all face in relationships, a battle between emotional honesty and the fear of the unknown. But in understanding this struggle, the Stoic finds peace, for they know that true emotional freedom comes not from suppressing our feelings, but from embracing them, from understanding that each emotion, each truth, has its own time to be revealed. When the moment is right, the words will come, and they will be spoken with clarity, not out of desperation, but with the wisdom of one who understands the delicate balance of love, truth, and silence. The unspoken fear, the pain of disconnecting. In the quiet recesses of the heart, there lies a profound fear. The fear of being left behind, the fear of losing the connection that once felt so certain. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, this fear is not immediately visible, but it is deeply felt. It is a fear that has grown over time, nurtured by the recognition that what once was stable and fulfilling is now uncertain and fragile. This fear is not the fear of the person leaving, but the fear of the very act of disconnecting itself, the fear of becoming less, of fading into the background of someone else's life, unnoticed and uncared for. The Stoic understands the weight of fear, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as an emotion to be acknowledged. Fear arises from the unknown, from the absence of control, and from the possibility of change. In the process of emotional detachment, the fear is not always about the end itself, but about what the end signifies. It is the fear of the finality of emotional separation, the dread of losing not just a partner, but a part of oneself that was once intertwined with another. When this detachment begins, the internal battle rages. On one hand, there is the longing for peace, the desire to preserve oneself from further pain. On the other hand, there is the fear of the void that may follow, the emptiness of losing the connection that was once a source of comfort. This fear, though deeply rooted, is not always expressed outwardly. The Stoic would recognize that the silence of emotional withdrawal is often a shield, a way of protecting oneself from the vulnerability of acknowledging such pain, for to express this fear would be to expose oneself to the possibility of rejection, to admit that something has been lost. It is far easier to remain silent, to retreat into the quiet realm of one's own thoughts, than to face the rawness of the truth that lies at the core of the disconnection. But the wise person does not run from fear, they meet it with understanding. They recognize that fear is a natural part of the human experience, a response to the perceived threat of loss. And in this recognition there is an opportunity for growth. The fear of disconnecting is not a reflection of weakness, but of the depth of one's emotional investment. To feel this fear is to understand that love has been real, that the bond once shared was something worth protecting. It is a sign of strength, not fragility, for it shows that the heart was open, that it dared to trust, and that the possibility of loss is what makes the connection so valuable. The Stoic teaches that the path to emotional freedom lies not in avoiding fear, but in confronting it with courage and clarity. When a woman emotionally disconnects, her fear is not something to be dismissed or ignored. It is something to be acknowledged and respected. It is a fear that arises from a place of love, from the understanding that connections, once made, are not easily unraveled. The Stoic does not mock this fear, but sees it as a part of the process, a necessary aspect of navigating the terrain of human emotions. To face the fear of disconnecting is to accept the inevitability of change, to recognize that all things, emotions, relationships, even life itself, are transient. In acknowledging this fear, the wise person does not succumb to it. They accept it, feel it, and then move through it, knowing that the only way to truly heal is to allow the pain to be felt without resistance. For in the end, it is not the fear itself that causes suffering, but our refusal to accept it as a part of life. When a woman disconnects emotionally, it is not a decision made lightly, nor is it without its own suffering. But by understanding the fear that lies beneath this decision, we can learn to embrace the impermanence of all things and find peace in the knowledge that even the deepest connections must sometimes loosen their hold. The weight of unresolved emotions, how it builds over time. Emotions, when left unchecked, accumulate like weight upon the soul. At first they may seem small, insignificant, a fleeting irritation here, a subtle disappointment there. But like small stones that gather over time, they eventually become a burden too heavy to carry, a force that demands release. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, it is often because the weight of unresolved emotions has reached a tipping point. These emotions, unspoken and unaddressed, have built up gradually, layer by layer, until they have become an insurmountable load that she can no longer bear in silence. The Stoic understands that emotions, like all things, must be processed in their proper time. To suppress them is to invite their eventual eruption, to allow them to fester in the darkness until they overflow in ways that cannot be ignored. When emotions are left unresolved, they do not simply disappear. They remain in the background, quietly shaping behavior, influencing thoughts, and creating a distance between the heart and the mind. The longer these emotions are left unspoken, the more they distort the perception of the relationship, turning minor grievances into insurmountable walls. For a woman who begins to emotionally disconnect, the decision to do so is rarely abrupt. It is a culmination of moments where her needs went unmet, where her feelings were dismissed or misunderstood. She may have tried to express herself, but the words failed to reach the one who was supposed to listen. Or perhaps she did not have the courage to voice what she truly felt. Over time, this silence becomes a form of emotional erosion. The weight of unspoken hurt, of unmet expectations, gradually shifts her perspective, turning what once was a place of safety and affection into a space of quiet dissatisfaction. The wisdom of Stoicism teaches that our emotions, when left unresolved, cloud our judgment. They pull us away from clarity, from the ability to see things as they truly are. And in relationships, when emotions are not dealt with, they accumulate, creating a fog that makes it impossible to navigate with certainty. The wise person, therefore, does not allow these emotions to build up unnoticed. They confront them, acknowledging their presence and seeking to understand their cause before they take root. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, she is often responding to the weight of these unresolved emotions. She may have reached a point where the emotional toll has become too great, where she feels that her needs have been ignored for too long, and where the burden of carrying unspoken feelings is too heavy to endure any longer. The decision to disconnect in many cases is a way of protecting herself from the suffocating weight of this emotional buildup. It is a way of creating space to breathe, to heal, and to reclaim her own sense of self. The Stoic does not deny the presence of unresolved emotions, nor does he seek to rid himself of them entirely. He recognizes that emotions are part of the human experience, but he also knows that they must be acknowledged, understood, and released. The wise person seeks to address their emotional wounds before they grow into something unmanageable. They do not allow the accumulation of dissatisfaction, hurt, or resentment to fester in silence. Instead, they engage with their emotions, seeking resolution, understanding, and clarity, so that they do not carry the weight of unresolved feelings into the future. For the woman who begins to emotionally disconnect, this is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is a response to the weight of her emotions, a way of saying, "I can no longer carry this burden alone." The decision to disconnect is often an act of self-preservation, a recognition that she must honor her own emotional needs in order to restore her peace. And while the emotional weight may have grown too heavy to bear in the context of the relationship, the Stoic understands that this does not mean all hope is lost. It is simply an opportunity for both individuals to confront the unresolved emotions within themselves, to face them with courage, and to seek a path forward, whether together or apart. In the end, the weight of unresolved emotions teaches us a vital lesson: that emotional clarity, honesty, and understanding are essential for any relationship to thrive. When emotions are ignored, they build like an unseen force, eroding the foundation of trust and connection. The wise person learns to carry their emotions with grace, addressing them in the moment, so that they do not accumulate into an insurmountable burden. For in doing so, they create the space for peace, understanding, and ultimately, the freedom to live fully, without the weight of the past holding them down. The longing for peace, the desire for emotional freedom. In the turbulence of relationships, there comes a time when the heart longs not for the return of what was, but for the peace that comes with emotional freedom. This desire for peace is not born from bitterness or resentment, but from a deep yearning for inner stillness, for the quiet that follows emotional release. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, it is often because she seeks this peace above all else. The constant emotional turmoil, the unresolved conflicts, the unspoken words. These have become a storm in her soul, and she longs for the calm that can only come when she has liberated herself from the chaos. The Stoic teaches that true peace does not come from external circumstances, but from within. It is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to remain undisturbed by it. This internal peace is not something to be attained by controlling the actions or emotions of others, but by mastering one's own heart and mind. When a woman begins to withdraw emotionally, it is often because she recognizes that the peace she seeks cannot be found in the relationship as it currently stands. The emotional dissonance has become too great, the inner conflict too loud, and she knows that only by disconnecting can she find the stillness she desperately needs. This longing for peace is not the result of a lack of love or affection, but of an overwhelming sense of emotional exhaustion. The constant effort to maintain harmony, to please, to be understood, this takes its toll. Over time, the emotional demands of the relationship become a heavy burden that stifles her ability to simply exist in her own truth. The Stoic understands that peace is not something that can be negotiated, but something that must be cultivated within. It is not found in the resolution of every conflict or the avoidance of every uncomfortable emotion, but in the ability to remain grounded, no matter the circumstance. For the woman seeking emotional freedom, disconnecting is often the only way to reclaim her sense of self. In relationships, we sometimes lose sight of who we are, caught up in the expectations and needs of another. But the desire for peace is a return to self-awareness, a return to the understanding that she is entitled to her own emotional sovereignty. This is not an act of abandonment, but one of self-preservation, a way of finding balance in a world that may have tipped too far into emotional chaos. The Stoic teaches us that peace is the highest form of contentment. It is not the absence of emotion, but the understanding that emotions in all their complexity do not need to dictate the course of our lives. A woman who emotionally disconnects is often seeking that peace, recognizing that only by creating space can she find the emotional freedom that has eluded her. She seeks to quiet the noise, to release the burden of constant emotional engagement, and to create room for clarity and understanding. In this pursuit of emotional freedom, the Stoic does not see the withdrawal as a failure, but as an act of profound wisdom. To understand that peace must come from within, and that sometimes this peace requires stepping away from what no longer serves, is a sign of emotional maturity. It is an acknowledgement that relationships, like all things, are impermanent, and that true peace comes not from holding on tightly to what is fleeting, but from releasing it with grace. For a woman who is emotionally disconnecting, the desire for peace is the desire for freedom. From the constraints of unresolved emotions, from the burdens of unspoken truths, and from the constant pull of external expectations. In the silence that follows this withdrawal, she finds space to breathe, to heal, and to rediscover the person she was before the storm of emotional confusion clouded her vision. The Stoic does not mourn this withdrawal. They understand it as a necessary step in the journey toward self-discovery and inner peace. Ultimately, the longing for emotional freedom is a call to reclaim one's sense of self, to honor one's own emotional well-being, and to seek the peace that comes with clarity and understanding. The Stoic knows that peace is the foundation upon which all other virtues rest. Without it, we are tossed about by the winds of emotion. But with it, we stand firm, unwavering, in the face of life's storms. And so, the journey toward emotional freedom, though difficult, is one that leads to a deeper understanding of the self and the world around us. It is a journey worth taking, for in the end, it is only through peace that we can truly find freedom. The fear of losing control, the subtle shift toward detachment. The human desire for control is both a natural instinct and a silent force that shapes much of our emotional landscape. When a woman begins to emotionally disconnect, it often arises from a deeper fear, not of the relationship itself, but of the loss of control over her own emotional state. In the early stages of a relationship, control is often an illusion, a belief that we can influence the course of events and emotion. But as time progresses and emotional dissonance begins to grow, the reality sets in. We cannot control another person's feelings, nor can we prevent the natural flow of change that comes with time. This realization can feel overwhelming, leading her to retreat, to regain some semblance of control over her own emotions and well-being. The Stoic understands that control is, at its core, an illusion. We do not control the actions of others, the unfolding of events, or the trajectory of relationships. What we do control is our response to those events, our ability to remain calm and composed, regardless of external circumstances. The moment a woman begins to disconnect emotionally, it is often because she recognizes that the constant struggle to maintain control over the relationship is no longer serving her. She can no longer hold the reins, and so she lets go, not out of apathy, but out of a desire for peace and emotional stability. This shift toward detachment is not always a conscious decision. It often happens slowly, imperceptibly, as the emotional strain of trying to control the relationship wears her down. She may have tried to influence the way things were going, to steer the relationship in the direction she thought it should go, but over time, the realization sets in that no amount of effort can change the trajectory of someone else's heart or actions. This is where the fear of losing control becomes more palpable. The fear that, without control, she will be left in an emotional void, drifting aimlessly without direction. But the Stoic teaches that true mastery lies in the acceptance of uncertainty, in the ability to embrace life as it comes without the need for control. The wise understand that life is inherently unpredictable, and that to spend energy fighting this unpredictability is to waste the precious time we have. For a woman who begins to emotionally disconnect, the decision is often a quiet recognition that she cannot continue to invest herself in a situation where she is powerless to change its course. She steps back not because she no longer cares, but because she understands that the only thing she can control is her own peace of mind. The fear of losing control is deeply tied to the ego, to the belief that we can shape our reality according to our desires. But the Stoic wisdom teaches us that the ego is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the realities of life. When a woman disconnects emotionally, it is often a sign of her wisdom in recognizing the limitations of her influence. She understands that in order to preserve her peace, she must let go of the need to control outcomes and instead focus on cultivating her own emotional resilience. Detachment, in this context, is not about shutting down or abandoning the relationship altogether. It is about creating space for herself, regaining a sense of autonomy over her own emotional landscape. It is about realizing that in order to maintain her inner peace, she must release the need to manipulate, to control, or to influence the course of another person's heart. This emotional release is liberating, for it allows her to see the relationship without the cloud of expectation, to accept things as they are without the need to force them into a specific mold.